I saw that
Yeah.
you were also an intern at Microsoft. What did you do?
Oh, I was. This was in 2015, I guess. I was I was on the Office for Android team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so specifically the team that was mostly doing PowerPoint stuff, but in general they were more like they were about the compositing and rendering stack layer,
Mm-hmm.
with some focus on PowerPoint. So and I think my project had to do with optimizing some of how, like, basically re-architecting and optimizing some of how the what was it called, the atlasing and the atlasing and compositing was being done.
What do you mean by
So
atlasing?
in graphics applications, it's one technique that's there is to have an atlas, which is like a giant texture on which you draw multiple things,
Mm-hmm.
and then you ask your content to look at specific areas of it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like common if you're doing text, because if you're going to be rendering like a sentence or just a paragraph, you're not going to render the letter A 50 times. What you do is you render the letter A once on this atlas, and then the letter B or any other letter that ends up in that text, you render it on this atlas. You remember, oh hey, I've already rendered A here, and then you just say copy it from here. You just keep doing that. So like stuff like that. So that's the general technique of having like kind of like a sprite sheet in
Yes, I
gaming, where
was
you
gonna
just
say.
have this. Yeah, you just have a giant thing with. It can be small things like letters, or it can be just the entire page. But like different part. Like if you're scrolling, for example, you might have different parts of the page rendered in an atlas, and then you kind of just point at different parts of the atlas. Um, so stuff like that.
So you are very passionate about making the web and also open source project very inclusive. I saw that you had a talk about that. Can you tell us a little bit more?
So this was more about making it so that newcomers can get involved very easily. And this comes from because I learned programming mostly from open source. And, and I mean, a lot of it was people being helpful, but also a lot of it was there were things that I had to learn and push for, and it's nice to be in a position where I can tell other people that, hey, if you want your project to be open, here's what you should do. So a lot of this is about so my position in general is that it's very good if you have an open source project. It's almost always a good thing to try and make it easy to contribute to, even if that means some upfront effort on your part. That's usually worth it, and it makes for a much better project overall, and you end up helping a lot of people in the end as well. And I have like a general list of things you can do this, like try to have easy bugs, try to explain like half of how to solve the problem on your easy bugs and link to some code and stuff like that. And there's just a whole bunch of things you can do to make it easier to contribute to a project. And I've applied that to my own projects, and it's always been great. It's worked out. Like for example, I mentioned that I had started Clippy, right? I used to be the main maintainer, and then someone else who was also passionate about lints kind of became a half maintainer with me. Like both of us spent equal time doing it. But now I don't actually need to spend much time on Clippy, because we had like many other people step up, start contributing, and eventually we gave them maintainership. And now no one has to do a ton of work because it's a large community, and it's really nice to see that. And it's always great to have that happen. So it's a win for everyone, because a lot of people I know in the Rust community also used Clippy and other projects that were open to contributors to learn Rust, or as a stepping stone to learn new things. And it's good to do that. And having like that focus of just you should try to make your project newcomer friendly. I, that's always been a thing for me, because that's where I come from. Um, independently of that, I also care about inclusion in general in open source, not just of the newcomers, but of people of different backgrounds and race and etc. So for that, I I have been doing stuff like mentoring
Mm-hmm.
at an individual level at various times. It's sometimes more than others. These days, I have no time, but yeah. I haven't done as much systemic things to improve this. The Rust project is trying. We have some plans to like help on this, but yeah, I do push a lot for codes of conduct in projects I'm involved in and stuff like that. But yeah, I do care about that. There's less that I've done for that, but yes.
It is such a important thing to do because you're opening up for more good work in the future for others. Uh, me and another friend, few other friends actually, we had yearly events we called Code for Good, where we chose some open source projects and help those projects get into a position where it would be much easier to contribute. Help them with the tagging and documenting and all that. And afterwards, we had like few nights or a few whole week people contributing those, and we would give some prizes and everything. And we tried a couple of things over the years. At first, we just forced people to sit down and contribute right there. I think that was a good thing in the sense that if you don't do it right then and there, it becomes a whole other thing. Time passes, it becomes harder. We really wanted someone to just contribute. But it was hard to do and hard to, do it over and over the years. It would be a really great thing if we can order.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of, I know a bunch of people have been thinking about like various things you can automate on making projects easier to contribute to, like things you can do that like automate out some of the boring work involved in that. I know one friend of mine one colleague of mine at Mozilla maintains like this cool spreadsheet of contributors because one of the problems, like it's actually pretty easy to get people to contribute the first patch to your project. It's about like the second and third and fourth patch that's harder because folks don't want to do, like for the first patch you want to give them something easy, that like very easy, but it's not interesting to keep working on easy stuff. It's just that the easy stuff lets you learn the process and things like that. So you kind of want to keep track of who all the current contributors are and what their general area of interest is and what they worked on last and when they worked on something last. So for example, a thing that I like to do with contributors is sometimes I'll be working on a thing and I'll file an issue. I'll be working on a thing and I'll realize, oh, this needs to be fixed. And instead of fixing it myself, I'll just file an issue and then sometimes be like, oh, wait, this contributor was working on this stuff before. I'm sure they'd enjoy working on this and say, hey, by the way, are you interested in this? And that kind of thing, automating some of that is like something my coworker has done with the spreadsheet and stuff like that. I have not done this myself, but like, yeah, there's some work in that space, but it is hard.
Yes. Basically, we need a recommendation engine just like Netflix, but for GitHub issues.
Yeah, that kind of thing, yes. That kind of thing would be awesome, but I haven't heard of anyone like try to build that as much.
Well, maybe they'll hear us. This is Microsoft's Learn TV.
Yeah.
GitHub is part of Microsoft, so that would be really cool. I think GitHub has interesting stuff happening. For example, there's trending GitHub repositories, which is so interesting. You look at it, and every time there's a new repository, which is like, oh, why did this become suddenly very popular? And I think it might help people to see, oh, okay, this is an interesting project I can contribute to. So, for our purposes, WebXR, Immersive Web, what would you like people to contribute to?
I mean, so for the WebXR repo itself, we've always had the help wanted issues, and people have, and the help wanted issues are basically a thing from the editor saying, we already know what needs to be done here. Someone needs to do it, and people have taken taken those up, and that's kind of nice. A problem is in the interest of like getting ourselves over the hump for CR, I basically went and fixed almost all of them. And so everything left is like tricky stuff that requires discussion. There are some help wanted issues left, but yeah. So it's still valuable to look at the spec and like comment on it or comment on the issues. I think giving input to any of the open discussions is always valuable. But that's just the core spec. All the other specs like hit test and layers and hand tracking, which is not really a spec yet, but we've got a skeleton in there of like how it's going to work. So that's where just looking at it, reading through it, and providing feedback is the easiest thing I think folks can do. But there are also issues on all of them, and many of them can be are tagged help wanted, or even if they're not, you can ask, hey, I want to work on this. What do you think? And I think that if folks want to get involved, that's the way to get involved. And you can also, if you are, I'm actually not sure how this works if you are not a W3C member organization, but I think you can at least attend the community group meetings.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
If you join the community group, you can attend, yes.
Yeah, so I think you can join the community group and attend the meetings and talk about all of the specs in the community group. And I think in general, providing input can be valuable. I think I and Brandon are often in situations where we're like, so we understand this issue, but we have no idea which action, we don't have a strong opinion on which action to take, and it would be nice if we had more input from users and browser implementators and everyone else. And we get some of this input, but not always, and it's good to always just have general input.
It also requires a lot of work on part of the person who is going to make the commitment to read through all of the specs, understand the discussions, and know the history a little bit. So I personally wouldn't consider that the easiest way of contributing, although it's very, very important, and we really do want to make that happen. I wonder how we can make it easier on people to understand. Yeah. So if you ever come up with ideas.
Well, that's where the newer specs come in as well, right? There's specs like lighting estimation, hand tracking, layers, which are much newer. There's less context. You don't also have to read everything. And they usually have an explainer, which is easier to understand. So you can go through the explainer, which is written for humans and not, well, the spec is also written for humans, but it's the explainer is written for humans who want to understand, not humans who want to implement. And that should give you a good head start. And also, it's not really the contributor's job to know the whole history. It's the job of like the editors. And even I don't know the whole history. Often there'll be cases where I'll ask Brandon or like I'll say to and Brandon will be like, actually, we discussed this 5 years ago, and there was a reason why we didn't do that. Yeah. So, but you're right. It is tricky and it can be intimidating. This is certainly the first time I'm maintaining a project that's not a code project. So with code projects, it's much easier for me to open help wanted issues and mentor people into contributing. So I am also less clear on how to best foster this kind of this sort of environment. But
yeah. Hopefully we'll figure it out in this process. But I think I got the sentence I wanted to hear from you, which was it's not the job of the contributors, it's the job of the editors. Not to say that, you should do all of the work, but most of the time I think hesitance from the general public is that someone will yell at them, right? Saying that, hey, why didn't you read it? Duh, we did talk about this, it's right here.
Yeah, so that is another major thing about like making your project newcomer friendly is you do need to take on the burden of dealing with stuff that you might wish the user had figured out on their own. People will ask questions, and it's very much a no stupid questions thing that like if you want people to be able to contribute, you should handhold them through the initial bits, and this can involve answering questions which to you are trivial or giving them context that is trivial to you because you were around back then. but just a little bit of engagement on that and a little bit of effort on that can have great wins, because you can just helping someone out that way is really useful. But at the same time, that's something you can only do if people come to the table. And when people are intimidated, they typically don't come to the table.
True.
So it's much harder to, you have to sort of, when you try to build this, try to foster this environment of contributing, you need to really try to make the project less intimidating, and that's very hard. And that's something that depends on the project. But yeah, that's one of the harder things to do, is getting people to get past the, this is a compiler, I can't possibly write code for a compiler. Compilers are complicated phase. Using Rust as an example of a project where this comes up a lot, where it's like, no, this is an easy thing to fix. You don't need to know how points to analysis in compilers works to be able to fix this small issue on diagnostics. And it's often something like that. You don't need to know how realms and microtasks work to be able to fix a small issue on the WebXR spec. Yeah, but getting that across so that people are willing to contribute is always hard.
And for immersive web, we have other stuff that people can help, right? The TypeScript types, tooling, and documentation, samples.
Yeah.
I feel like they are a little bit easier to get into. But it might be just my perspective, of course.
The what?
Those projects, like, you know.
Oh, those projects, yeah. Yes, those are probably, yes. In particular, writing good and interesting samples is always nice, and documentation as well. I know that Mozilla has one person, Eric Shepard, who's been doing a lot of work on documenting it on MDN, and their work has been really great, and I think more people contributing to MDN or any other documentation, like the HTML, JS documentation websites, web documentation sites would be valuable.
And we have the immersive web.dev, which has some samples as well. What kind of samples would you like to see for immersive web, WebXR?
I'm not sure. The samples repo already has a lot. I think this is part of the issue, I think, is that my imagination when it comes to demos is very constrained. Whenever I write a demo, it's very boring. Unless the feature itself is interesting, like there's this joke that everyone who works on the browser can't write JavaScript, or writes the worst JavaScript, because all we do is like write the bare minimum demos or tests, and tests are basically the most horrible thing. They have really bad code, often deliberately bad, and sometimes it's more that it's using practices that are not considered best practices, but because the browser developers know exactly how a browser works, it's fine to do things that are very iffy in the JavaScript world, but are really fine when you're just doing a test. Overall, like when you're writing a demo for a feature that you're working on, what your goal is making sure every part of that feature works, so you end up with something ugly, not something beautiful, because all you're trying to do is make sure everything works by one single thing that you can see. And yeah, so because of that, like my imagination on like what kind of demo would be cool is very limited. It's either extremely hard cool stuff, like for example, what I would like someone to write for the hand input stuff is a hand input app where you can pet cats and stuff. And like the hair on the cat will move. But that is a very, very hard thing to do.
You mean a virtual cat? Okay.
Yes, sorry, not a real cat. Like a virtual cat, and like the fur is rendered with whatever, and like the fur can move when you do it, and that would be really cool. But like it's hard so what I was trying to say was I think what people should do is look at the sample pages and try to think of cool samples that exhibit various WebXR features that we already have, and that would be nice.
How about as far as the WebXR tooling or apps that you would like to see? that are not just for demo purposes?
I'm not that sure. I haven't. Um, I mean, I'm really glad that there are multiple frameworks that are using WebXR really nicely. And as WebXR gets more features, I hope they expose these features well. Um, as for tooling, I've seen some of the tooling out there, like Eighth Wall, and it's really cool. Um, but because I don't write WebXR content on a day-to-day basis, I only write it when I'm like trying to try stuff out and demo stuff. But I don't write. I don't work on hubs, for example. I'm not writing a really complicated WebXR app that does all kinds of things. I don't really have a strong opinion on tooling because I've never gotten to the point where I need some.
Nobody's asking you to try out tooling for Servo?
For like what kind of tooling?
For developer tools, for example.
Servo has developer tools, so but those are just normal JavaScript developer tools, nothing like WebXR specific. Well, Servo has this thing called, Servo has a way of running WebXR sessions where like your arrow keys are it just renders to the screen, so you don't need a device, it just renders to the screen, and your arrow keys say like set the position and orientation. So it's like a quick and dirty test thing, but aside from that, not much in the way of tools. How are you finding the WebXR group from like the last, I guess, you've been involved for like 4 months now, right?
It's been a few months, you're right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So before then, I joined a TC39 meeting, which is much bigger because JavaScript's hey, and it was very different. So I'm sure the other groups in W3C who has been around much longer might have more discussions, but I find it fascinating to be in this, kind of smaller group and people who are super passionate about WebXR. It is nice. And generally, I'm going to make a horrible generalization here. I think the XR community is much more enthusiastic. It's probably because it's much newer community and these people, it's a much smaller community. Yeah.
Yeah, this was definitely how Rust was when it was starting. Like the community was full of people who were just very, very excited about everything because it was cool, and it was not really at a stage where people were using it that much, but it was very cool and people were there because it was cool. And I think XR has that same feeling. I've been spending, I think a lot of times I look at like the XR and WebXR, especially the WebXR communities and like the Rust communities, and I see a lot of parallels in how they've been evolving. So it's cool to see that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How long have you been involved with the WebXR? Did you mention?
WebXR, I think more than a year at this point.
Oh. Were you developing any of the WebXR specs at the time for Servo? Before then?
No, I started implementing it in Servo, and that's how I got involved. Before that, I was doing all kinds of other things in Servo, but not WebXR. Yeah, we did have a WebVR implementation that I had not worked on, and I had a general understanding of how it worked, and I reviewed some of that code, and I'd done some stuff in that repo, but not that much. Most of my work was other stuff.
What is the next things that you guys are going to try out on Servo in terms of WebXR?
Alan has this implementation of layers that he's working on. So I'm hoping to have the layers, like we're hoping to have stuff to experiment with the layers module of basically you could have like a cylinder layer which you render to that spins around, that is around your head and stuff like that. So I'm kind of excited for that. I've been really happy to see the movement in the layers module WebXR that like Oculus, Mozilla, Microsoft, everyone is, and Brandon and Google, everyone is just really pushing on it, which is nice to see. But yeah, so that's the next thing. I think there's also some work on trying to make a Unity component, or was it a Unity? I think it was a Unity component out of Servo, so that you can have just a normal 2D browser, not like WebXR, just 2D browser in Unity that can be used for XR applications. Um, yeah, yeah. There's also that's most of what's happening. There's some other stuff that I kind of am interested in exposing. Like I want to check out hand meshes. I know that Diane is interested in gaze tracking especially because Diane wants to make sure that from a privacy angle, the gaze tracking doesn't get misused. So Diane is very interested in this, but I don't know if she's started working on that. Another thing we're looking at is like experimenting with trusted UI. There's just a whole host of things that we kind of want to look at. But I think the main thing that's in the works right now is layers.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I saw a demo recently, could be Apple or Google, where people were using this as a screen, a layer as a screen. Instead of having your actual screen, you can have unlimited amount of screen if you're in a AR.
So I've been saying that for ages. I've been saying that like if we can get the rendering and there are ways to make the rendering much crisper. There's Servo has this thing called Pathfinder, which does path rasterization on the GPU, and it makes everything so much crisper. But anyway, you can. I've been saying for years that like if we get AR, we really should use it so that you can have just infinite monitors. I'm not even a person who has two monitors. I have one monitor. It's not big. I often use my laptop to work. But it would be really nice to do the whole, I don't know, like a lot of sci-fi films do the whole thing of like there's this hologram screen floating and then you take it and you throw it there and then it would be really nice to just like, here's the code that I'm reviewing other stuff. Here's my terminal and having like different windows that you can move around and yeah, I think that would be really nice. I'm excited. And given how much companies spend on really big monitors for their developers, this is probably a lucrative space. I don't understand much about like um, basically running a business, but like I feel like this would be I just feel like this could be a lucrative space, and I'm surprised that there's not much work in this space yet.
There are not many headsets that are comfortable enough yet, but
yeah, but like you'd start seeing demos, but like you said, there are demos now. Yeah.
You mentioned the movies. Is there any movies or TV representations when you see it, you're like, this will be amazing, or like, oh, this is.
I mean, there's tons of that in like everything that like Tony Stark does in Iron Man, I guess. Which is like all of his interactions with computers are not computers. He just has these holograms that he's manipulating, and the HoloLens definitely feels a lot like that. I guess I'm not sure how accurate like the hand tracking and stuff is. I found that it was really accurate, but I'm not sure like how good our gesture detection stuff is to be able to do things like that really well. But I suspect like that's something that would be in the near future something you can do, and that's just a very cool idea to just be able to do.
And being able to fly, of course. I'm not sure if we can do that as efficiently and safely. Recently,
it's just an OpenXR extension of the HoloLens you have to enable, and then you can fly.
Yeah, just fine. Yeah. I mean, the thing in the back, that's what it does.
That's what makes that noise.
I recently saw one episode of this new series. I think it's called Upload. So, spoiler alert. Well, if you've never seen it, when people die, they upload themselves into a virtual world, which like has super body tracking, so you are able to talk to people who are living, and they can come and visit you as a hologram and everything, and that works perfectly. But their headset is exactly what we have today. And when they take it off, they have like marks on their faces, which is like...
Yeah. Okay.
I hope that won't be the case. Although, you know, there are some technologies that hasn't changed for ages.
Yeah. Yeah. And people are making some devices smaller and stuff like that, and I think there are devices that could work like Google Glass, I guess, that not so heavy and just basically projects. Yeah.
Have you ever used one?
Nope. I've seen one somewhere, I think, but never used one.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't think you can easily get them anyway now. So,
Yeah, and all of the apps, nothing is being maintained.
yeah.
But I know one person who still wears it. I'm surprised, and he says like nothing, almost nothing works now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is San Francisco, so you would have. I think there are many people. I probably know multiple people who own a Google Glass that doesn't work. But like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving your time on a Friday night. I hope you do something fun after this. I know you have some more work to do.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much for all your work at Immersive Web, let me tell you, here too. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.